And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I just kind of want to talk about the upcoming midwinter event and throw out. Uh, I've done a version of this show a few times before in the past. Basically, going to big events can be intimidating. For those of us who have done it a ton of times, it's really easy to just kind of write off all of the various off ramps or sticking points that might cause somebody to be like, I can't make it. So I just wanted to put out a show. This is maybe a repeat topic for longtime listeners, but I wanted to put out a show talking about how easy it is to show up, how valuable it is, and just encourage everybody that if you're on the fence about going to one of these regionals, pull the trigger. Like, do it, show up. You're gonna have a good time. I mean, you might not win, but you're gonna have a good time. So, the first thing I would encourage people to do when looking at any competitive event is get some goals straight in your head. If you're a new player to Versus, your goal should not be to show up and win the whole event. I mean, yes, it could happen. I'm not trying to dismiss or diminish anybody else's skills, but if you're coming to an event like Midwinter, in fact, let me start over. Midwinter, if you're not familiar with, is, in my opinion, the best Versus event of the year, every year. Shout out to Carlos, Theo, and Peter, the guys from the now defunct Team Attack podcast, for all the work they've put in carving this event out of nothing with their bare hands and then continuing to support it for these many years. It's truly awesome. And it is absolutely a homegrown, community based, community driven event, which is very cool. Gen Con is Worlds is prestigious, it is its own thing. And it's a unique thing that no other event can really touch. But Midwinter also has its unique charm that no other event can really touch. This is, again, in my opinion, the best event of the year. It's not Worlds. It's not Worlds. I concede. But as a lover of Versus and a huge fan of this community, I think Midwinter is where it's at. So the Midwinter Classic is bearing down on us, and I want to encourage everyone to show up for it. So if you've never been to an event before, goal setting is very important. I think even if you're an experienced tournament player, goal setting is something you should really keep in mind, because at the end of the day, you don't want to have a bad time. Even if you don't get the results, like, we all want the results to be W's. We all want to win. But realistically, all of us except for one person are not going to win. We're going to have one champion and the rest of us are varying degrees of losers. And that's okay. Like, that pressure is part of the fun of competing in tournaments, in my opinion. But you don't want that pressure to curdle on you. You don't want it to turn sour and have it ruin your weekend, or even just your day, because you had unrealistic goals. So again, let's go back to, this is my first tournament. I'm going to show up and my goal is to win the whole thing. Chances are very good I'm not going to win the whole thing. There's going to be a lot of killers, a lot of experienced players in the room, and they're going to make it extremely difficult for me to win the whole thing, especially as a new player. And that's just on the playmats. That's not talking about all of the surrounding stuff, like the kind of, you're not going to be in your comfort zone. So there's going to be some discomfort, some inconveniences. You're going to be in a strange place, surrounded by people. It's going to be loud. You're not going to have access to all your stuff. So there's a lot of things that can happen that make competing at a regional different than just playing at your locals, and much different than playing like at your kitchen table with your friends or your family. And having that all sort of factored into your headspace as you go in, at least for me, I find it very helpful. I find being taken by surprise is harder than if I think through and I'm kind of mentally prepared. Oh, of course they lost our hotel reservation. That's the sort of thing that happens when there's a big, busy convention at a place. I'm mentally prepared to deal with this inconvenience. No big deal. We're going to get through it. And while ideally we don't want our hotel reservations lost, but that principle, I think, can be taken and applied not just on the trip itself, but to the playmats as well. So approach the whole event with the attitude that, and the acceptance that some things aren't going to go your way, whether that's getting a parking ticket or that's drawing zero locations in an event. or in a match. Sometimes things aren't going to go your way. And if you're kind of prepared ahead of time for that, you aren't going to allow that bad luck to ruin your day, and you're still going to end up having a good time, which ultimately I think should be the goal. Yes, we all want to win. Subset, like goal B is we all want to have fun while we're doing it. So and in order to assure that, in order to ensure that you bring your best possible game, you need to have your head in the right spot to be able to do that. So I definitely recommend getting a good night's sleep, waking up early enough that you can eat whatever kind of breakfast is appropriate for you. I know some people don't like a lot of food in the morning. Some people get real cranky if they don't eat in the morning, but having something in your stomach and time to show up to the event and fill out your deck list where you're not pressured, because you really don't want to make a mistake on your deck registration. I highly recommend going to Upper Deck's website and getting the deck registration form the night before and filling it out the morning of, before you even get there, filling it out the night before if you know your deck is locked in, but filling it out before you're there at the event with the noise and the people and everything going on. Because if you make a mistake on your deck registration and you accidentally put a 2 instead of a 1 or something, there's a million ways you can make a mistake. But when the judges go over those, they might not catch that mistake till round 3. And now they're coming up to you to go, hey, can you explain what's wrong with your deck here? And oh man, I presented an illegal deck. Oh no, that's not the kind of thing you want to find out about once the tournament's underway. You want to have all your stuff on point. And I actually highly recommend getting somebody in your friend group, in your play group, to look over your deck list after you've written it. There is that thing that happens where your brain sort of fills in what you expect it to see, and you might miss a typo. You might miss a small error. Oh, I wrote this version of this named card, but I actually meant this one from this other expansion. These kinds of little things, you want to be meticulous. You don't want to get a game loss or a DQ or any other problems because your deck list isn't right. That's awful. So, along these same lines, we're still talking about headspace. Think about your potential matchups clearly. If you're going into a matchup and you know you're unfavored, don't let that rot set in. There's this attitude that I like to have where you have to make them have it. Even the worst matchup in a card game, you're still talking about like a 60% chance. So if you've got 40% chance to win this, and that's a pretty bad matchup to be 40-60, but that's still 44 out of 10 times you're going to come out on top. That's not worth throwing away. So keep your head in the game, give your opponent the opportunity to make mistakes, don't concede early, take a deep breath, keep your head straight, make good plays. And if it doesn't work out, hey, you weren't favored in that matchup anyway, but at least you know you gave it your all. I think it's way better to play the best game you can and lose than to give up and like not care about the result. Because one of those, you're going to walk out of there and feel like, man, if I would have just kept my head in the game, maybe I could have done it. And the other one, it's, hey, I left it on the play mats. I did the best I could. I feel like that's not only important for yourself, but like for the quality of competition in the room. Like on some level, we all show up to Midwinter expecting everybody to bring their best. And this is maybe a little more strongly phrased than I actually intend, but it's almost disrespectful to not bring your best in a tournament like this. Like disrespectful to the opponent. Like we're not here to play around. I mean, we're here to play the game, but when there's cash on the line and it's a big prestigious event, everybody should be taking it seriously. That's what we want to see. That's the kind of competition we want to see at the playmats. That's the kind of competition spectators want to see. So, to support you having the best performance possible at the playmat, I highly, highly recommend making sure you have the essentials. Now, not everybody is as uptight and persnickety as I am, but I don't go anywhere without my eye drops, my chapstick. I always make sure I have some granola bars, some protein bars, some nuts, some low sugar, high protein snacks that I can throw down quickly and easily without necessarily having to leave the room. Having all that kind of stuff available. If you're the kind of person who gets really irritated if you get something stuck between your teeth, have some of those like little floss sticks or a thing of floss. So after lunch or in between rounds, you can go get your teeth cleaned out if that's going to be mentally draining to you. Now, some people don't have these problems. Some people aren't uptight like me. and don't have all these problems where if things aren't just so, it starts to nag and drain on their cognitive energies. The way I try to make sure my head is in the best spot possible when I show up to the playmats is making sure I don't have to think about anything other than the game. I don't have to think about my grumbling stomach. I don't have to think about being thirsty. I don't have to worry about what's going on with where I parked my car or where my things are or my hotel. Like, I make sure, maybe it comes through, but I spent some time in scouts when I was a kid, and that always be prepared mindset has really gotten ingrained in me. Where if I have the checklist of all the things I need to be concerned about and I check them all off, then I can turn my brain off on all those topics and focus 100% on the playmats and the play. And that's where I want to be. So, to that end, I think you can't control what your opponent is going to bring. Like, you can have some degree of control over your preparedness for it, in that you should be looking at the whole meta, testing against matchups, particularly testing against the matchups that you think are most likely to show up. That's all really important. But at the end of the day, your opponent has a very good likelihood of playing a main character. Well, maybe less a main character, but putting things in their deck that you're not going to be ready for, that you're not going to be familiar with. Cards that you might have to say, hey, can I read that? You might see main characters like that, but that's less likely. More likely, you're going to see a meta main character, but with some weird cards in the deck that you didn't expect. And you got to maintain calm in those situations because, again, you can't control what your opponent is going to bring. You can only control what you're bringing. So, knowing your deck inside and out and knowing, hey, if my opponent wants to go heavy on counters, this is the answer I have for that. If my opponent's trying to play slow and dirtily, this is my ability to push through damage and counter that. Knowing what your answers are to general archetype situations is going to put you in a much better situation than trying to memorize all of the relevant cards in the card pool, because it's just so many at this point. There's so many cards. The likelihood that you're going to see a card that you failed to memorize is there. But what I do is I look at that card and I try to figure out which bucket of strategy that card gets put into. And once I put even an unfamiliar card, if I put it in the aggro bucket, well, I know how my deck deals with aggro. Okay, now that's a problem I have a solution to. I know what answer I'm driving towards. Even if it's low percentage, even if it's an unfavored matchup, I still know what I'm doing. And that lets me make better choices. And really, the best way to get that kind of muscle memory is reps. You got to put in a lot of time with these decks in order to know what your deck is going to do in each given situation. And there are going to be times where the correct line of play is to scoop up your cards and say good game. Like, that sucks. But that does happen. That is an element of playing these games. There are going to be situations where you simply can't win. Sometimes that's going to be because you made a mistake. Sometimes that's going to be because your deck didn't feed you the cards you needed at the right time. Sometimes it's going to be because your opponent drew the nuts. But in all those situations, once the mistake has happened, once the bad draw has occurred, once the nut draw is beating you in the face, you can't like change it. So this feeds back to my first tournament tip, which was mental preparedness. Be mentally prepared for things to go wrong. And then when they do, it's not going to hit you like a wound. You're not going to feel crushed and gutted and emotionally devastated going into the next round. You're going to go, oh, okay, well, this happens at tournaments. There's lots of good players here trying to do the best they can. It makes sense that I would drop one. It makes sometimes even the best deck draws dead. It makes sense that this would happen to me. And by having this built into, I keep saying you because I'm offering this as tips, but these are all things that I do myself. Mental gymnastics I go through to make sure that I'm the most prepared I can be for any competitive experience. I do think visualization makes a lot of sense. Visualizing yourself winning, visualize yourself making the correct plays. These are really powerful things to do. But I feel like we all kind of intrinsically know that already. We all sort of know, hey, I want to do card A into win condition B, and that comes easy. I don't think people need a lot of encouragement to think about and visualize the ways that they're going to do the thing that they want to do. I think it's harder or less intuitive, maybe is a better way to put it, to visualize yourself successfully coping with adversity. But I think that's more important than visualizing dealing with success. Dealing with success is easy, man. Just don't be a jerk. Like it's pretty simple. Smile, say thank you, congratulate your opponent. Like being a gracious winner is so much easier than being a gracious loser. It's it's much easier to slide into being a sore loser, in my opinion. Because it sucks. Losing does suck. Everybody feels a little salty. Even if you handle it graciously, you can't tell me it doesn't sting. You can't tell me you don't feel a little salty when you take an L. Um, so being prepared to do that, maybe you never have to flex that muscle. Maybe you go to the tournament and you do like Peter did several midwinters ago, or like Cell did at Gen Con, and you just run Swiss rounds undefeated. It can happen. It doesn't happen that often. It most of the time you drop a game or two in Swiss rounds, even if you make the cut. And having the mental preparation in place, knowing, hey, I might feel this way, and here's how I'm going to deal with that feeling. Those kind of coping mechanisms, I think, are as critical as things like make sure you go to the bathroom between rounds, especially if you have a round that goes late. Go hit the restroom before you start your next game because you don't want to be turn 7, 8, and feeling that bladder pressure building, knowing that, oh man, I got to finish this game. I can't make mistakes, but I really got to, like, you don't want to be in that situation. So these are all like little techniques, little tips that I have picked up over my years of playing in competitive card games to try to help do as much possible to mitigate the background noise so I can focus on the game. Like none of this, you'll notice none of this stuff I'm saying here is actually going to help you win a game. Like having a protein bar to eat so that your stomach isn't rumbling during the game, that's not going to win you the game. But that's going to allow your brain to put more of your cognitive energy into the game rather than having it split and distracted. And really that's what this comes down to. I guess the most succinct way to describe this is minimization of distraction. So when I talk about things like bringing chapstick, bringing my eye drops, it bothers me when my eyes get dry. Is that silly boomer nonsense? Well, yes, it is. I'm an uptight old man now, but I know that about myself, and therefore I make sure I have the things I need so that I don't have scratchy, itchy eyes when I'm trying to think about how to sequence my attacks. So that's, I guess, if you've made it to this point of the show, uh, I'm just going to repeat myself again. So to summarize, I think the most important parts in preparing for a tournament and the reason why you should do it is the fun, is the community. I think even if you lose every game, spending time with this community in person is absolutely valuable. It is a great experience. It is, you are so rarely do you find gaming communities where we all come together and get along, where everybody's friendly. For the most part, yes, there's little bits of drama here and there, but I think it's really fair to broad strokes say that the Versus community is supportive. It's one full of kindness and fun, and it's really a great experience to go to any of these events. So that's the reason I think you should show up, and the reason I think you shouldn't be intimidated to show up. Um, but if you want to do well, if you want to focus on your tournament prep, then I think preparation is the most important part. And whether that's preparing in terms of jamming a lot of reps with your deck, preparing in terms of setting up a good gauntlet so you can test your deck against other uh, most valuable players in the particular meta, making sure you have the utility belt of snacks and water and chapstick or whatever other specific things you need in order to feel mentally sound and able to focus on the playmats. And and that's the event. That, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this all comes down to. All the preparation is only there to try to give you the best possible chance of performing well at the playmat. And once you're there at the mats, it's just you and your opponent. Like those moments, that high pressure when I'm playing against somebody who I know is just as good or better than I am. And let's see what the cards give us. I live for that. I know some people talk about the nerves and the pressure of it and how, oh, I don't really like competing because that sick feeling in my stomach. I love the butterflies. I love the pressure of it. I love talking a big game and having that added pressure on myself to show up and perform behind what I said. Because if I don't, it's going to be embarrassing on top of sucking to lose. I think all that is awesome. I love it. I think I think it's good for everybody's brain, actually. I think trying to do hard things and failing and having to like eat that is a really, really healthy experience. I think it's a really healthy experience to try to do a hard thing and succeed too. So, any way you slice it, you're putting yourself through something that might be uncomfortable in moments, might not feel good 100% of the time, but the totality of the experience is going to be a positive one. I can absolutely guarantee it. Midwinter, 10 out of 10, would recommend. I hope to see y'all there. Go win some games.